Welcome to the Korea Pro Podcast, your weekly guide to understanding the most pressing and complicated developments shaping South Korea. We're your hosts, Jeongmin Kim,
John Lee,
and Joon Ha Park of Korea Pro.
Go beyond headlines as we explain not just what happened, but also what really matters and why it matters.
If you monitor South Korea for work or just trying to keep up, you're in the right place.
This is the Korea Pro Podcast. Good evening, everyone. Please keep eating. We'll start talking now. Welcome to the Seoul Circuit July edition. My name is Jeongmin Kim. I'm Executive Director of Korea Risk Group, and I'm the moderator for tonight. Thank you all for joining us this evening. The title is a little bit cringe, but it was my idea, Lee reading, Decoding China's Playbook for Lee Jae-myung Seoul. Today, we're excited to have John Delury as our esteemed guest speaker. We actually go way back. I took his Introduction to International Studies class back in the day when I was a freshman, and I got a B. I still hold grudges about that. So I'm going to ask a lot of difficult questions to him. Power dynamics change. So brace yourself. John is a historian of modern China and an expert on U.S.-China relations and the Korean Peninsula. He's the author of Agents of Subversion, The Fate of John T. Downey and the CIA's Covert War in China, and a co-author of Wealth and Power, China's Long March to the 21st Century. John has returned to Seoul after spending time in China studies at the American Academy in Rome. I'm very jealous.
Yeah.
How long did you stay there?
Oh, that was 1 year.
1 year.
Yeah.
Still jealous. I saw you surfing there. And as a visiting professor at Louise and John Cabot Universities. So welcome back to Seoul. We missed
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. It's great to be back.
And having recently been in Europe while maintaining deep interests in East Asian geopolitics, John is perfectly positioned, I think, to help us brainstorm together, both on the broader term sort of a lens towards how the world sees South Korea and China-South Korea relations, and also try to read China's mind a little bit as well while we're at that. And let's start with the housekeeping notes for those of you who are here for the first time. The first part of our program is the moderated discussion between me and John, and it will be recorded and published as a podcast episode. And you can check out the Korea Pro podcast on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and other platforms. And the later Q&A session will be chat mouse rules, so we will take the recording device off after that, so you can freely ask questions and comment, and also disagree with each other, which we usually think it's a good thing. I think that these informal venues usually allow rather than formal events like meeting government agencies or whatnot.
Yeah.
And so my opening question for John, I'll start with an easy one, John. Why don't you just start introducing yourself a little bit above the stellar version of a bio that I just introduced, what you have been up to in the past year, particularly being in Europe, how that shaped your views on East Asia geopolitics.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jeongmin, and thanks to all the Korea Pro team for inviting me for this event. I do feel she's brought this up before. I have no recollection of this B. I'm a little skeptical of that. Was her grade? I think she's used this to motivate herself. And so
you taught constructivism. I didn't get anything, but
needless to say, if it's true, she's certainly not a B student.
well, thank you.
She's one of my most brilliant students, and I was very happy to know that you'd be hosting this, and we would be in dialogue. So it's wonderful to be here. And yeah, I mean, as you said, Jeongmin, I've been gone. I think that's the key, also caveat for our discussion. Is that I think for better and for worse, I've been gone from Korea with only one brief visit in between for 2 years in Rome. And I sort of go between my work on China, which is primarily trained as a historian of China, and then my work on the Korean Peninsula, both sort of North and South Korea. And for the last 2 years, based in Rome, I was also very China focused. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it is an interesting, but prior I was for 13 years at Yonsei, and really know many of you from that time. And so this is a funny moment of sort of returning with fresh eyes to a place that's very familiar, and yet I think, seeing it a little bit differently. There are also ways in which you will certainly correct me and disagree with me, both you and the group, in our discussion. because I'm a little out of it. I'm not thinking with the vantage point that one has in Seoul and South Korea. So maybe some of that will actually be interesting, and other bits will be totally irrelevant. So yeah, that would be the updated bio. But I'm back. I left Yonsei, but I am back indefinitely in Seoul.
I see. So still, although you have been gone for 2 years, you still have been monitoring to a certain extent the area, East Asia region, to a certain extent, including China. So I guess what you bring here is a different perspective, I guess, from people who always monitor Korea and China from here.
Yeah, and I should add a caveat. The whole martial law thing that you guys pulled off here forced me to suddenly pay a bit more attention. I remember vividly, actually, I'm sure everyone remembers. I guess most of you were here. It must have been in the afternoon in Rome, Italian time, and I was sitting in this beautiful library at the American Academy in Rome. It's this idyllic place, and I'm writing whatever I'm writing about empire and all these grand things. And I see some update, and I audibly, in a library, it's supposed to be quiet. And I'm just, it just utter shock. And so I wrote a number of things out of that. And that did sort of end the detachment. And I feel, even though I wasn't physically here, I've been paying a lot more attention since December.
So you're sort of forced back to study up on what news developments exactly there was, like who the president was or who the...
I know, I remembered who the president was.
That's true.
Yeah. Pay more attention.
Well, okay. So beautiful library, martial law. Well, when it comes to, we had a pre-event discussion to narrow down things on what we need to talk about. And what actually stood out to me among the things that you explained is that when it comes to trying to understand what China thinks, it's not just about the bilateral calculations, but it has to be looked through multiple lenses, what Washington thinks or how China perceives Washington thinks, or the European capital thinks. And then we have to come back to, under this context, what does it think about South Korea?
Yeah.
So under that context, and after spending time in Europe, what surprised you the most, I guess, when it comes to people outside Korea's sort of perspective on what Korea-China dynamics mean for them?
Well, let me start with, from, again, kind of a European perch. I'll kind of circle back, I hope, to your core question there. But from the European perch, and there are Europeans here in this room, I know, there were sort of two moments when Korean issues did impinge on European consciousness, or I should say political or geopolitical. Cultural stuff is big there, like everywhere, but in the geopolitical sense, and it was martial law. And the other, of course, was, when it was confirmed that North Korea had sent at least 10,000 soldiers to fight for Russia against Ukraine. And that actually did stimulate, I would describe it as a very serious uptick in the European discussion of, wait a second, maybe we have to pay more attention to the Korean Peninsula. Maybe these theaters are much more connected than we realize. There's always been that rhetoric, but it was suddenly much more tangible and much more real. That said, even that uptick, I saw it sort of start to tick down by the time I left and waning. And when you ask about the China-Korea dynamic, which we'll be discussing, and which certainly you, and I think most people in this room, there's a very high level of appreciation of the complexity and the subtlety, the long history, the many aspects to that dynamic from both sides, China, Korea. That's very poorly understood. When you start to travel, I think, away from the Korean Peninsula, and there was certainly curiosity and interest, and I tried to get in those conversations and have those conversations as much as possible, because I think Korea, now I'm talking about South Korea, does have, there's something for everyone to learn from the way that South Korea perceives China, how to manage China in a somewhat uniquely Korean way. But you really feel the importance of distance. Coming back here, we are so close. It is right there. It is China is just towering over South Korea's future. And needless to say, in Europe, China does not tower.
Mm.
Russia casts dark shadows over Europe because of the war in Ukraine. But China, even China's far out there, and Korea was very far out there. So I don't know if I finally got around to your
Yes.
question.
It was a loaded question, so sorry.
No.
But when it comes to thinking about what Korea means or what China means or what Japan means,
Yeah.
let's say from the US perspective,
Yeah.
it's considered as like a security linchpin sort of thing, for instance, in the Indo-Pacific, wide Indo-Pacific strategy. Are we still using
I was gonna say,
Sure.
we used to play a game, there was a drinking game, where, and of course it was journalists. Academics would never do this, but there was a game where journalists would say drink whenever linchpin or ironclad appeared in a statement coming out of Washington. Are we?
I think that's being for our next Seoul survey, but there is a, State of Union.
Again, this is the fresh eyes, or maybe I'm just not paying as much, haven't paid as much attention, but I feel like linchpin and ironclad are not being used with the same frequency.
All that much anymore.
They're still there. I can't let those go, but sorry, what was your question? I got lost
So
in
from the
beautiful words.
So from the US perspective, when they look at China, Korea, Japan, it's sort of considered one bucket of security interests rather than like those bilaterals between China, Japan, or China, Korea, or Japan, Korea, as like a specific things that they have to consider.
Yeah.
So is it different from the European perspective or the US perspective?
Well, so I was going to say it's so difficult now to even complete a sentence. The US,
So what is the US?
Yeah.
Is a big question.
Yeah.
Right?
There's still a traditional foreign policy consciousness in Washington. I think for all of the changes introduced by the Trump administration now and in its previous term, there's still kind of a through line of ironclad and linchpin or shorthand. And I think probably this group we're fairly familiar with that way of thinking. There is a hierarchy. Actually, maybe somebody disagree with this, but especially if there are any State Department people in the room, I should have checked. But anyway, there's a hierarchy of allies, and there's, it's quite natural for the hub to encourage the spokes by saying, that other spoke is working a lot better. Maybe you should think about learning from the other spoke. So in the hub and spoke alliance relationships, I would say in the Biden administration, there was quite a bit of that. And so there's a certain pretty standard Washington worldview where South Korea is automatically put in a category with Japan. And Korea is the underperforming ally, the more difficult, a little bit less important, but also
sometimes a weak link.
Yeah. And we can come back to that from a Chinese perspective, right? So I've encountered that attitude countless times. And then of course, sort of a flip side of that, this was very strong in the Biden administration. We'll see how much, at the Rubio level, at least there's a kabuki theater of continuing it. It's hard to know. But there is, of course, also in the traditional Washington view, the linkage between Korea and Japan. This is a long-standing US foreign policy dream, is like, can we just get those two together on the same page and in line with us doing what we want them to do? So the Biden people worked very hard at that. And so far, I would say that Trump people have not totally just tossed that out the window.
I have two follow-up questions to the thing that you previously mentioned and the issue that we're discussing right now. But let's first touch on, you did mention that there was an uptick in European interest in what South Korea means to them security-wise, and then it sort of dwindled down by the time you left. Can you walk us through what happened exactly?
Well, the uptick was just when the reports are first, kind of unconfirmed, and as those became confirmed reports, again, I can't really, it's one of those things that you observe through being there and through little things like conferences being organized, and you're starting to get a lot more interest in emails and meetings, at my level, because here I am, someone who knows something about Korea and has written on Korean security a bit randomly in Italy. and then, of course, the very serious group of Asia experts, Italians and otherwise across Europe, I think they would agree. Everyone felt the perception that now they needed to take North Korea, Europe needed to take North Korea seriously as a threat.
Direct threat.
Yeah, that directly impacted European security vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine. And that was really new, like maybe new since the Yuan Empire knew. And so, but my impression at the time, I was quite disappointed at and again, I would really invite comment and disagreement from our group. But I remember being disappointed in terms of, in particular, South Korea didn't seem to really seize that moment in a serious way. I suppose South Korea, even that, these are still the Yoon days, right? Was, they had been pursuing the kind of NATO plus IP4. And then I suppose the major way was through the defense agreements and sales, which have been ticking upward in significant ways to places like Poland. But I think there was a potential for that to be a moment of kind of a paradigm shift moment. In my perception, that did not happen. It was sort of like, oh yeah, we got to worry about North Korea too. To put it really bluntly, I felt in that moment, Europe and South Korea could not find a really powerful common, like, yeah, this is the moment in which we now work together in a kind of, there's a quantum leap in our cooperation. I did not perceive that. And then of course you do have martial law and something like, well, what's going on in South Korea? And so the two big stories impact one another and intersect, and then it becomes very hard to have any kind of interaction with South Korea. But I would say it was even before martial law, it had already kind of petered out.
Well, let's put a pin on this, and I'll invite our European colleagues in the room later to comment or disagree or agree with the analysis just now. And let's go back to the thing that you mentioned about hierarchy. I think a good example about that is the day after South Korean election, the first comment that came out of the White House about the South Korean election, when a reporter asked any comments about Lee winning the election in South Korea, the response was something along the lines of, we know that there was a democratic election in South Korea, but China should not interfere or influence South Korean democracy going forward. That was kind of random. How do you read why that statement was out or what it meant? Because in South Korea, all the editorial boards, 조선일보, 중앙일보, they were all writing their own takes, reading into the intention under the premise that it was instructed from higher up.
Yeah. Well, this goes back to how to complete the sentence the U.S. thinks, because it also applies even to the U.S. government says. In the case, it can be incredibly difficult to know who is speaking, except when Donald Trump himself, is speaking. But I don't know, you said random. Why do you say random? To me, that didn't seem random. And I think that's why South Korean papers jumped on it. That seemed quite like they knew exactly what they were talking about.
I guess the editorial board's take was that usually it first comes with congratulatory remark. But to mention some other country's name in the first comment after an election seemed not normal.
I see. No, I read that as deliberate. I mean, quite deliberate. We all know what was the word on the street here, especially on one side, or particularly on one side of the divide over martial law, all the allegations of Chinese subversive influence on South Korean elections, and former President Yoon using that in his defense very publicly. The way in which the kind of pro-Yoon protesters were using English signage, were using hashtag Stop the Steal.
They're still using it.
Right. And I had...
Their clothes are actually quite pretty, the t-shirts.
It's good. The aesthetics should be good, at least. I had friends, journalist friends, who don't follow Korea, coming over here and, sending me photos. It was all photos of the Stop the Steal signage, because it's like, oh, I understand this. I can read this sign. I mean, it was quite effective as a messaging campaign, if you just use English, you're going to draw attention from there. So there's plenty of. I'm not saying Trump himself. I think that you can correct me, Jeongmin, if I've missed something, but Trump himself has kind of left this alone, not gone there, even to degree that maybe is almost surprising. But the people around Trump, the various worlds there, I think are fully aware of what they're doing. They're stirring that pot. And it's specific to Korea, but it is part of a much broader campaign that is bipartisan and predates Trump. And in fact, I would not say Trump is the epicenter of this campaign, a campaign to alert the world's attention to the dangers of Chinese subversive influence. I mean, actually, I saw it happening in Italy. And then I also saw less of it happening as Secretary Rubio began dismantling the State Department and cutting funding for those kinds of programs. And I should say those, there's some value to that. I mean, my own views of China, I'm a panda hugger who's also worried and skeptical. And there are ways in which every country needs to be vigilant, including South Korea. So, but, would the Biden administration have done it in the first congratulatory nice election? Were the Chinese involved? I don't think so. So that kind of messaging is pretty clearly a sort of poking right away, right at the beginning of the Lee administration. And yeah, we'll see. You've got Morse Tan, causing havoc at Incheon Airport. I see Chad cheering, big Morse Tan fan there in the back. What is that? Who and what is behind that? I don't see these things as random. I'm not going full conspiracy theory either, but not random. These are deliberate.
Deliberate.
Yeah.
Okay.
These are acts of American subversive interference, if you want. Which, having written a book on the CIA, I'm pretty well versed in how long America's been doing that.
Well, you're the perfect person to say it on record, I think.
Yes.
And against that backdrop, which China is all monitoring probably anyways, let's go to one of our main topics today, seeing what China's calculations might be when it comes to handling South Korea against everything that we just mentioned. You have monitored Chinese strategies in the past few administrations in South Korea. And just let's start with a broad question. What is a pattern that you see, regardless of the administrations, that China uses when they see a new South Korean administration?
Okay, well, I think that's a great question. I'll start with a quick one. I think there's a pattern, but challenge me if you could see this not holding. I think there's a pattern of, this would just be Xi. I mean, Xi Jinping has had enough counterparts that we can limit it to Xi's China, and how Xi Jinping approaches
Unless
South
he
Korea.
retires next.
Oh, yeah. I believe there's a pattern of Xi pretty deliberately trying to get off on a good foot with a new South Korean administration, regardless of liberal and conservative. I mean, we've talked before about the 10-year anniversary is coming up of the immortal moment when Park Geun-hye appeared on the balustrade of Tiananmen Square to celebrate the great victory over fascism and Japan.
Yeah.
And that was that was reciprocated. I mean, Park Geun-hye made it clear from her campaign and first months in office, she wanted to really improve the relationship with China. But it was coming on both directions. I mean, Xi Jinping was embracing that 100% and doing a lot of things. I remember visiting China in those days, and there was basically a Park Geun-hye propaganda campaign happening in China, in Chinese. He went to Chinese bookshops, and her autobiography had been translated into Chinese, yes, and was like put on the bestseller table.
Wow.
It was called the wave, like K-wave. It was like the Park Geun-hye. So they were pushing that at the high level and kind of at the public level. And I mean, but again, you saw that with Moon Jae-in By that point, of course, the relationship had kind of gone down the toilet over Thad.
Yeah.
Park had decided she had made a huge blunder in putting any capital in her relationship with Xi. But when Moon came in, he sent signals, I want a better relationship with this. And the Chinese reciprocated, Xi reciprocated. This, I believe, I hope people in here will disagree with, but my perception at the time was for all of the, in the early Yoon, in the Yoon transition, I saw signs of Xi and Yoon kind of doing once again, okay, let's keep on.
Flirting a little
Yeah,
bit.
good footing, yes. I'm trying to remember now who came to Yoon's inauguration. It feels like a very long time ago. But I believe the Chinese sent Wang Qishan, who that's a real power player. I mean, that's Xi Jinping sending his like right-hand man, At that moment, Wang Qishan was absolutely, that's a conduit to Xi. That's a very high. I think Biden sent, what's his name? The vice presidential first man, Doug.
Yeah, Doug.
Yeah, right. As an American China watcher, I was like, that's weird. That's not Wang Qishan. That was a way.
Who would have been Wang Qishan level? That's why I
I don't know. That's a good question. I'll come back to that. Who is Joe Biden's Wang Qishan? Obama. So actually, that's good. I think it's Obama. So there was already signaling going on there on both sides of trying to. So if that's a pattern, and if that holds, especially with Lee Jae-myung, who signals, being pro-China, and of course is attacked in many circles here for being too pro-China, then I'm anticipating the Chinese that she would be like, okay, let's do everything we can, kind of early on. Let's see where this can go. And we have the two events. I know you guys. I'm a super fan of your pod as well. So I heard you all trash the idea of Lee Jae-myung going up there on the balustrade of Tiananmen Square. But I haven't given up hope on that. But anyway, you got that, and then of course you have APEC, which probably will happen.
Early November.
And so you do have these high-profile ways in which the signaling between the Lee administration and Xi administration they'll try, I think, to get off a very good start.
I'll come back to the APEC and the potential Victory Day attendance, but you mentioned certain circles having an impression, or still having an impression, that Lee is quote-unquote pro-China. During the election campaign, Lee tried to intentionally veer off that subject. When asked about Taiwan or China, he would joke. Asked about North Korea too, he would not really go all that much in depth, like unification, he would have mentioned that. So he tried to actively dilute all the pro-China, pro-North Korea sort of image, at least during the campaign. And he is maintaining that to a certain extent. And I guess a good precedent to look at is at the end of the Moon administration, the thing that the conservative circles here sort of had like the general wisdom is Moon is very pro-China, but in comparison, Yoon will be very anti-China and more aligned with the US on issues like Taiwan Strait. So the PPP, People Power Party conservatives here and experts as well have been sort of pushing forward with those comparisons when it comes to security policy. How much of that is true, looking at what they actually did? And what did China think actually? Did they actually think that Moon was pro-China and Yoon was anti-China at the end? Not just the first part of the administration, but overall.
Let me try that from a Chinese perspective, an imagined, perspective of Beijing. And so to your question, I think they would say not a huge difference. I think that the idea of Moon Jae-in having pursued this pro-China line, I don't think China felt that way. There was not actually, the relationship between Xi and Moon never went up to the levels that Park and Moon had been at, where he invited, Xi Jinping invited Park Geun-hye to, a special dinner that no one had been invited. They really laid it on thick. You didn't see that. Moon's visit, I remember the famous image You guys remember this from, I think, his first visit, and he didn't make that many, but his first visit to China, there was this wonderful picture of him in a jiaozi, like in a mandu place, like a dumpling restaurant, in Beijing, like eating dumplings, I think, with his wife. And it was sort of this like, yeah, I'm not getting red carpet treatment, but these are good dumplings. It was kind of,
Yeah, I remember that.
it was very interesting. I thought, was this passive aggressive? This is an interesting image. But anyway, they wanted to improve the relationship, but I don't think they felt that Moon was, really in their camp or in their pocket. And, Moon was, as we know, very explicitly focused on North Korea, right? That was his top issue. And the way that he was pursuing progress with North Korea, he was not working through Beijing. He was working through Washington. All the emphasis here was on aligning with what Trump wanted to do. Maybe not Washington, but Trump, right? And Moon and his people understood that Trump was this strange maverick figure in the American foreign policy world who actually thought talking to Kim Jong-un was a good idea. And they recognized the opportunity and did everything they could to kind of exploit it and optimize it. So they were very focused on the United States. And China felt that, at one point, Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, gave this, pissy press conference or whatever it is, where the statement had just come out. I don't forget now which one it was in the series of Moon Kim statements, the Pyongyang Declaration, or maybe even earlier. And it talked about the 3 or 4 parties. This was the whole, what was it called? The end of peace, the declaration.
End of war declaration.
End of war declaration.
End of peace.
Oh, it brings back the Freudian slip. End of war declaration. And anyway, there's language about 3 or 4 parties will work toward a peace treaty, to replace the armistice regime into a peace regime. And the Chinese were like, 3 or 4? You kidding me? We're not the or 4. We fought the Korean War. We are definitely involved in. So it was quite interesting watching. Again, I think from a Chinese frame, Moon was not a big China guy. I was not perceived as a big friend of China. And then more quickly on Yoon, I don't know, I'll bounce it back to you. Like, what's the evidence of Yoon pursuing a hawkish approach to China? There were symbolic things. The language was mostly the same as the Moon Biden statement. In the Yoon Biden statement, there was just a little, tweak to make it a little stronger in Taiwan, but there was not a sea change in attitudes. And the Yoon administration, I don't think, was trying to encourage a sea change in Korean attitudes towards, if there's war in the Taiwan Straits, we have to be there, And so I didn't see, it seemed a little more cosmetic, going to the NATO plus meetings.
Right.
I did not see Yoon as this big China hawk. I realized there's a much more hawkish wing in his base, and there is a more kind of pro-China wing on the other side. But I didn't really see either of those driving.
Me neither.
The presidency.
I think most of the statements, I think where some of the more conservative experts here might sort of pick on would be more active participation in the statements, multilateral, unilateral statements mentioning Taiwan Strait and here and there. But then aside from that, he actually was very much focused on saying that, China is our biggest trade partner. We have to maintain good relations to a certain extent, unless there is a, change of status quo using force.
Right.
Ta-da. It's
right.
it was pretty generic.
I suppose one thing you could point to where there was a clear difference between Moon and Yoon, and it'll be interesting to see where this goes into Lee Jae-myung, was the whole trilateral, the aforementioned American dream of Japan, Korea, and the US working in concert. And on that, I would say, the China hawks did have more room to run in terms, and of course, the Biden administration really, really wanted that. So it aligned very well with the priorities of the US government at that moment. The Biden administration wanted it much more strongly than the Trump administration did in its first term. And again, to me, it's still a question mark. Does Trump really want US, Japan, and Korea deepening their trilateral cooperation. I don't think that's very high on Trump's list. Trump himself, there are parts of the Trump administration that will keep that going. But that would be one place where the Chinese don't like that. The Chinese don't want to see that triangle strengthen. And so that would be one place where the Chinese would have not liked what they saw in the Yoon administration.
Well, speaking of Japan, US, and South Korea, and China, Victory Day invitation that I mentioned earlier, it's actually a very tricky test for Lee to navigate, I think, because the invitation went from Beijing to the Lee administration presidential office, which the office confirmed, but they made it very cautiously, the announcement saying, we got it. We got the invitation. We are deliberating it, period. And in South Korea, the usual tradition is when you're elected, regardless of whether you're progressive or conservative president, you go to the US first, for instance, or at least make a promise that you'll go to the US first, right? So that's one tricky part for Lee to handle because Trump is very busy right now, very distracted. And also
Jeffrey Epstein stuff.
Oh yeah. Ooh, that's spicy. Yeah. What was I saying?
That's what it does. You say those words and then the mind goes blank.
Oh, right. And compared to Park Geun-hye, invitation for Park Geun-hye, domestically, politically, it's more tricky for Lee to navigate because of the political baggage that he has. When it comes to the previous Xie remark, his images of pro-China person, all these conspiracy theories online, and his need to maintain the moderate votes until the general election in a couple of years, and sort of try to maintain the base as well. So that's really tricky for Lee to handle. And what is Beijing's calculation inviting Lee, and what would be Lee's best move forward, do you think?
Yeah, so that's a really good way to frame it. It's sort of like in the American context, there's this, this phrase, it's old now, that only Nixon can go to China. Only a rabid anti-communist. I mean, Nixon built his career on hating communism. Only he could kind of get away in an American domestic political context with doing something that was quite controversial and unexpected. And so that's a very good point that Park Geun-hye could get away with that in a way that it's the opposite dynamics for Lee Jae-myung. He's kind of walking right into the storm and can invite all of the opposition party arguments and the public concerns about, oh, wait, was the White House spokesperson right? So it's risky. It's a high risk, questionable reward move. I guess that's why. Can we break the fourth wall? Can we ask for a raise of hands really quickly?
Yeah, sure.
I'm just curious. Who thinks that Lee Jae-myung will go to Beijing for the victory parade? Raise your hand. And who thinks he will not go?
If you're not in here, in the room, everybody raise their hands.
Well,
you will not go.
There are a few undecided,
Yeah, sure.
That's why I asked. There's maybe a silent minority out there. I think this is one of those issues where my 2 years away from Korea shows. Because, but the way you asked it, that's great. Why did the Chinese publicly make it? Why did the Chinese make it public? He's warmly welcome. They're putting a little bit of pressure on him. They could have, but it's kind of friendly pressure. It's because they could have just been like, he's not going, so we're not gonna bring it up. Because from a Chinese perspective, I don't want to go too heavy on the loss of face stuff, but it's a little bit of you want to make announcements publicly about the heads of state you invite who say yes. It's not a great look for China that they're putting out there, we've invited so and so and so and so and so and so. Oh yeah, none of them came. So they're putting some pressure on him. They're also putting themselves out a little bit on a limb. And I guess I'm still not convinced, like the room, that it's impossible. I think from a managing China calculation, I do think it's a smart move. I don't think it was such a bad thing for Park Geun-hye to do it. That's a bold statement, defending Park Geun-hye all these years.
You'll get recruited by the presidential office now.
right? Black hole.
Yeah.
No, I think that it's a way to, if Lee Jae-myung were to go, he's going to get some capital with one of the most powerful leaders in the world, and someone who also, given the economic future with the United States, the erratic nature of these negotiations, the huge economic impact that tariffs can have, even if it's not at 25%. The fact that we all know the foreign ministry could gleefully announce that they made a great deal, an arrangement, and then days or weeks or months later, Trump could put on Truth Social, that deal with South Korea is crap. Why did we do that deal? And everyone will say, you did that deal. And he won't care, and it'll have to be renegotiated. So with that kind of uncertainty with your top
ally.
Yeah, you need a good relationship with China, and you're going to have issues across the board with China as well. But it's not a bad idea as a new leader to pick up some capital. And the Chinese will know the risk he's taking, the risk that we're talking about in this room. So they will sort of appreciate it. I guess one question I have, and you can answer this, Jeongmin, is could he not theoretically go to the United States first?
Well, I think that was what his office actually directly said. I think was one of the ministers that got nominated when a reporter asked that question, what will be the first trip abroad? The answer was, well, we have to break from this norm that the South Korean leader has to go to US for the first visit. So they are mulling over the idea, I think. But I think most of the pressure comes from the public sentiment against it still.
Yeah.
And Lee is a type of person who thrives when he's aligned with the public sentiment.
Yeah.
So I think that is the biggest pressure that he has.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
rather than what he actually gets from a summit. What can you get from a summit with Trump actually these days? You cannot negotiate everything in one summit.
Right. That's true. Although Park Geun-hye would say, beware of what you think you get from meeting Xi. But yeah, well, the vote was very clear in this room. I'm just going to say, and if you need to check this, I can give you names of faculty at my brief former university in Rome, that when the conclave was meeting and the whole world was watching for the white smoke to decide the new pope, I was out having pints of Guinness with some colleagues. And inevitably, as you do when you're drinking Guinness, you bet on something. So we bet on the new pope. And I had absolutely no idea who the new pope would be. There was one of the colleagues who's a very serious expert on the Vatican, and it was fascinating. He was telling us the whole list of who's who and who's most likely, et cetera. And I just blurted out. I was, after a few pints, I was feeling my Irish American MAGA pride. And I just said, I'm taking the American. Literally not knowing who the American was. I just said, I'll take the American. And someone looked up on the betting pool, and it was 55-1 odds on Papa Leone.
Oh.
So you guys watch out. I won 55 pints of Guinness on that bet that are just waiting for me. Whenever I show up in Rome, I get to meet my buddies.
He's got good odds last time.
So we'll see. But, as this vote shows, it would be a big risk that Lee Jae-myung is taking, and I guess probably he won't. I think from a foreign affairs perspective, it's not a bad idea.
I have more questions, but my final during the moderate discussion is a pushback actually.
Great. Been waiting for my B professor.
So we touched on what Lee might get from the potential visit and the complications, domestic political, complications here, but also it's not just, let's say, it's not an invitation to go to China for a biodiversity conference, right? It's a military parade. It's a victory day. So it has a certain symbolic nature to it, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just going to be South Korea and the US watching it, but also other capitals that you mentioned early on in the event that will see what South Korea's decision is when it comes to whether or not to go to a military parade.
Yeah.
So what kind of international risk is Lee taking if he decides to go, despite the rewards that he might be getting?
I can only think of a flippant, evasive answer, which is that he has to frame it as a parade. It's not a military parade. It's a parade to celebrate the victory against fascism. And what is fascism? It's basically martial law. So he is going
Oh, that's clever.
to Beijing to show solidarity with the united front against martial law. No, I think
I don't think you're kidding.
you're right. You're right. You know me well. No, I think that in terms of the global repercussions, it will depend. We haven't talked about this. Who else goes,
Right, he
right?
mentioned that if
Yeah.
Trump goes, he wants to go.
Yeah, and who else is on the balustrade? I mean, again, the Park Geun-hye ages really badly because she's next to Vladimir Putin.
Oh, yeah.
You know, then again, people forget Ban Ki-moon was there. There were 2 South Koreans in the front row, you know. So if the UN Secretary General is going, you know, and if there are other world leaders going, if it's again, but if it's sort of just Lee Jae-myung from like the West or OECD or whatever we want to call
Or
that,
the adopted West.
yeah, then there will be a like, that's weird, you know. I guess he's pro-China. I guess he's anti-Japan because not only is it a military parade, it is a parade about defeating Japan. So there will be a lot of that. That probably won't play as big here, but that will play again to kind of the traditionalist view in Washington. But I don't know. There are Europeans in the room can disagree. In Europe, I mean, it's not going to do big damage. It's going to be like it's going to be a real blip. So I don't think that global reputation should drive his decision. Now I feel I've argued too strenuously the importance of Lee Jae-myung going to Tiananmen Square. So but that's okay. I think because it's a contrarian opportunity. So I'm making a very hard sell.
Well, really last question before I open questions to the floor. If you or she, what would you give him if he comes as a reward? Big enough thing that could dilute the risk?
Yeah, I mean, again, this would not be the way that would be constructed. It wouldn't be just like the thing itself is ultimately symbolic and his visit is symbolic. So he would not go expecting, it wouldn't get like a real concrete passage. What he's getting from Xi is like a relationship. When you need me, we can work together, you know? And I think that's primarily on the economic side. How is South Korea going to weather the Trump tariff storm? I'll say one more thing. One person who I think will look and be like, oh, that's interesting. Who's that guy? Is Donald Trump. And from a sort of negotiating from strength position, I'm not sure it's a bad idea. If you look at this purely from the calculus of Lee Jae-myung trying to strengthen his position as much as possible in dealing with Trump, Trump's going to look at it. He's not going to be making moral judgments about who's there or not. He's going to be making kind of power judgments. He's going to go, oh, that's interesting. The South Korean guy is there.
First row.
He's a player. You know, he's talking to Xi. And so, again, I think that would be another reason it could be used.
I see. Well, thank you very much for your insight. Now I will open questions to the floor.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We'll brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why it matters, delivered to your inbox every morning.
If you want to stay ahead of the curve, sign up for Korea Pro to get a full package of insights, from daily expert analysis to profiles, month in review, week ahead, and more.
And until next time, I'm Jeongmin Kim.
I'm Joon Ha Park.
And I'm John Lee, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.